You're about to enter into a new world of knowledge, curiosities, and high strangeness. This is a podcast of Straight Up Strange Productions.
You're listening to Mysteries and Monsters. I'm your host, Paul Bestall. The latest drop of Unsolved Mysteries episodes released in late summer on Netflix featured the return of the Mothman. As part of that episode, numerous witnesses in the Chicago area spoke publicly for the first time on camera about their experiences. The witnesses had all previously spoken with today's guest, Tobias Wayland, who joins me to discuss this episode and the witness accounts included therein. But before that, of course, don't forget you can support Mysteries and Monsters by signing up at patreon.com/mysteriesandmonsters. $4 a month gets you ad-free episodes, guaranteed early releases, bonus content, and more. Thank you to my latest patrons, Martin and Oliver, and thank you to each and every one of you that continue to support the show with your contributions. It is greatly appreciated. Mysteries and Monsters is across all social media networks. Please subscribe to the Mysteries and Monsters channel on YouTube. You can find also at mysteriesandmonsters.com your news and episodes updates. If you've not yet already, please leave us a review on whichever podcast site you use to listen to the show. You can also visit our exclusive merchandise store available via TeePublic, and the link for that is in the show notes as well. Our intro and outro music are performed by the marvellous Weary Pines. Thank you as always to Dean Bestall for his wonderful artwork. The show is produced by Brennan Storr of the Ghost Story Guys, and Mysteries and Monsters is delighted to be a part of the Straight Up Strange network. It's time to keep our eyes peeled as Tobias and I discuss the return of the Mothman. Back in 2019, Tobias Wayland released his first book, The Lake Michigan Mothman, which covered the period up until the book's release. That release saw Tobias join me on Mysteries and Monsters for the very first conversation, way back on episode number 46. Now, Netflix's latest batch of episodes for the Unsolved Mysteries series includes an episode on The Mothman Revisited, which has drawn a new batch of witnesses like a moth to a flame. Tobias, welcome back, my friend.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yes, apologies for the very obvious moth-based pun there in your introduction, Tobias. I couldn't resist myself.
Who doesn't love a good pun, really?
I'm glad you appreciated it. I was hoping you would. Now, I think you're showing off now, Tobias, because you've also been on an episode of Expedition X. So are you currently cornering the Mothman market in modern paranormal series?
It seems that way, but I can tell you it wasn't on purpose. I did not set out to be the Mothman guy when I joined this field professionally back in 2016. Well, interestingly enough, I think much like John Keel, my initial interest was in UFOs, and that's what I mainly had studied and investigated prior to us forming the Singular Fortean Society. Of course, the Singular Fortean Society covers all manner of paranormal phenomena, so we've investigated everything from UFOs to cryptids to ghosts and hauntings, and even weirder sort of parapsychological things, time slips, things of that nature. But when these sightings began in 2017, I very dutifully picked them up and started covering them for our website. And of course, as I probably said before on this show, I didn't expect it to go anywhere. There was those 3 MUFON sightings, and they weren't very well investigated, not because of any wrongdoing on MUFON's part, but because the witnesses just weren't generally available, or didn't make themselves generally available to the investigators. And so it didn't seem like it was going to go anywhere. It seemed like it would just be one of those articles that I would run once, and that would be the end of it, and we would just kind of all move on and forget about it. But obviously that's not what happened, and so here we are.
I think for me, I find it quite telling because, it's a couple of years ago, because when you were on Expedition X, which is a show I love. I love Josh Gates. I enjoy both Expedition Unknown. I enjoy Expedition X. I'm interested to see how that new series goes. Now Jess has left the team and we've got somebody else in there. So I think you guys have got them already in North America, but we as usual, we're about 6 to 8 weeks behind. So we don't know how this is going to work out. And so there's a real contrast, I think, Tobias, for you as a investigator and as a man that has basically placed your hat on this strange phenomenon over the last few years, that Expedition X is a show that's on standard TV, shown all around the world. I think this has clearly shown the power of Unsolved Mysteries, because as we were laughing about before we started properly, I can only imagine that the reaction to your appearance on this show is 1,000 times more than any kind of feedback you got from being on Expedition X. And that's no disrespect to Expedition X, though.
You're not wrong. And that's why I was surprised. I really didn't see the strong reaction to Unsolved Mysteries coming. It caught me completely off guard, because when Expedition X aired, it's a relatively popular show in our weird circle. And so I had friends that saw it and they messaged me and were like, oh, you're on TV, but that was about it. Like, I don't think I got a lot of extra followers on social media. I didn't see like a sharp increase in book sales or anything else to really indicate to me that a lot of people were suddenly paying attention to the Mothman phenomenon, or me in particular, or anything like that. Which was completely unlike Unsolved Mysteries, where I had the exact opposite. I still haven't caught up with all of the messages and emails and everything else that I have received as a result of being on that episode. So it's been wild.
I think that speaks volumes. Expedition X, I suspect, Tobias, is the kind of program that people like us will watch and the general public don't. Whereas I think Unsolved Mysteries, the general public will watch it and then we're surprised when they react to the weird stuff. Because for them, they've never come across it before. So that for me, I think, is the biggest difference. Obviously, it's got a far larger audience because it's a massive worldwide show and it's never been more popular than it is in its. So I can only imagine what it's like to be one of the featured researchers on an episode and then within a week checking that email inbox, or how much traffic you get into the Singular Fortean site, or how many extra likes you've suddenly started getting on Facebook and stuff. Was it daunting, Tobias?
It was. It really was. Like, I'll tell you, the thing about Unsolved Mysteries is their bread and butter is not paranormal stuff. It is true crime. And true crime has never been more popular. True crime is huge, and it appeals to a very broad audience. And so that's what brings people in. And then, like, they've watched 4 true crime episodes, so might as well stick around for the 5th one, like the weird Mothman one. Like, you've watched this many, just watch one more, and yeah, so it has reached a lot of people, probably far more people than any pure paranormal show ever could, just because of the popularity of something like true crime. And it was daunting in some respects. Like, I certainly have no issue with people reaching out to me. I've made myself a public figure on purpose, so I am generally available for people to reach out if they feel like they need to talk to me for any reason. But what has been difficult has been keeping up with the sheer volume of messages. And the difficulty really for me is that I don't want anybody to think that I'm not, prioritizing their experience, or that I don't take it seriously, or that I'm blowing them off or something. And so, like, I've made a few posts on social media where I'm like, look, I am so flattered that everybody has reached out, and I love you all. I take all of this very seriously, and I will respond to every single person. It just takes some time. Like, I changed my automated message on my author page, it used to say, give me like 1 to 2 business days, and I had to change it to like 5 to 10. I was like, because like literally, I'm like, it might be a week, maybe 2 before I can get back to everybody. And that's ongoing still, like it's been a few weeks now since it came out, and things have slowed down a little, but they're remaining fairly steady, I think, as the episode reaches new markets, and not everybody watches things as they come out. So there's probably always going to be a trickle of people that find me after seeing it. But the response has been overwhelmingly positive. I was surprised by that. I thought that, once it became very popular, I thought that there would at least be some cranks or, somebody to just kind of reach out. It's the internet age. So I just assumed there would be more trolls and things like that, but there really hasn't been. It's everything I've received, every message barring maybe 1 or 2 jokers that weren't really like offensive, but were just obviously, trying to pull my leg or whatever, has been really, really, really positive. I think that this has struck a chord with people where they feel empowered to talk about things that maybe they otherwise wouldn't have, which was the whole point for me. So regardless of how many messages I receive and how overwhelmed I might feel at times, the fact that everything has been so positive means that there's no amount of this that I can't handle at this point.
Is it strange, being a person very similar to myself, Tobias, that for us, John Keel and the Mothman Prophecies is probably one of the cornerstones of our paranormal libraries? It's one of those books that most of us have. If you start out, or if somebody's wanting to start reading about strange things, it's a book I will always recommend in the first 4 or 5 books. If somebody says, can you give me a few books that you recommend I'll get into to start this? You have been a field investigator for MUFON. You've been covering all kinds of strange phenomenon. And yet the one that seems to now be magnetically attracted to you, Tobias, is Mothman, very similar to Keel, who, let's hope that in 20, 30 years' time, you're not getting really annoyed with people and telling them the last thing I ever want to hear about is bloody Mothman, as he famously said here in Sheffield back in 1996 when somebody asked him about it. It kind of became a noose round his neck, but by the time the film came out, sort of 6-7 years later, he kind of re-embraced Mothman. And towards, as he sort of went on towards the end of his life, he seemed very comfortable with it again. Is there a fear of this becoming the main focus of what you do? Because one of your key strengths, along with Emily and the other people that you work alongside with in the Singular Fortean, is the fact that you're interested in all aspects of the weird.
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been times where I wouldn't say that I dreaded or was upset in any way about being known for Mothman, but I would be lying if I said I had never considered my legacy. And I think the reality of this field is that if you are remembered at all, it will be for your most popular case, whatever that ends up being. And if for me that is Mothman, then so be it. Really, like, most of us don't have much control over how the work we leave behind is perceived. We can only do our best to be as credible as possible and present things as openly and honestly as possible. And the rest is up to the perception of our audience and whoever is writing history. And so I think it's important to make your peace with that. And the reality of me investigating Mothman is that I have been able to speak with a lot of different people from a number of different backgrounds. And I have been able to accomplish a lot of what I set out to accomplish, which is helping experiencers either through the cathartic release of being able to speak with someone who will take them seriously, or in some cases even better understand their own experience, be that by putting it in context with other experiencers, or even being able to explain something with a prosaic explanation because it's, their experience is based on a misidentification or something similar. And so I think regardless of the phenomenon that I happen to be investigating, like while doing that, the fact that I get to do that is the most important thing. And then, in terms of, I guess, being pigeonholed, Mothman, I guess if you were going to be stuck somewhere, Mothman's a pretty good place to be stuck because, if you go back and of course read stuff like the Mothman prophecies and things of that nature, it sort of touches everything, so they're like, you still get to do UFOs, you still get to do ghosts and hauntings and talk about all of that stuff as it relates to the Mothman phenomenon, or as a Mothman phenomenon might relate to those subjects, because they do all seem interconnected. So there's enough variety to keep me interested. And of course, I still investigate other things. But if people know me as the Mothman guy, like, that's fine. Better. There are far worse things that you could be known for than that.
Especially in this field, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, so how did this all come about, Tobias? Because I think this is the interesting thing for me. I was quite surprised that Unsolved Mysteries had plucked this one out because, and this is no criticism of your particular episode. I think this particular drop, there's been a lot of grumpy comments online, not particularly about the Mothman episode, but I think the Jack the Ripper one, everybody's gone, what the hell have they picked this one for? And even as someone that would consider themselves a very basic level ripperologist, I have to say, when I saw that, I was like, why have they picked this one? Because, as you say, one of Unsolved Mysteries' cornerstones of its franchise and its longevity is the true crime aspect to it. The fact that numerous cases have been solved over the years in the previous, Robert Stack runs. And so we still have that legacy that's still going on from the old version of it, it seems, that still cases are still being sorted out and dealt with. And so this one, when they've picked out some of the true crime episodes, some of them have been absolutely baffling. I mean, I have to say the one from the first season, I think, where they dealt with the French count who murdered all his family and has just vanished. I can't stop watching that episode because I just cannot get my head around it. And I love all the weird ones, and I love the Paranormal Navajo Rangers episode and things like that. And so when I saw the Ripper episode, I was scratching my head because it just it seemed against everything they've normally done. Especially when you think, well, if they're going to do the Jack the Ripper one, well, there are more interesting unsolved serial cases in the last 50 years, I think, that we've got a real chance of solving more than something that happened 126 years ago. I'm not going to open my drawers up, Tobias, and find a letter from one of the detectives involved in that case. Because it did make me laugh at the end. If you've got any information about this particular case, can you let us know? Oh, yes. I've got
Right.
Inspector Aberline's diary in my drawer, yes. When there's cases like, even if you want to go like really obvious, well, why not do an episode on Zodiac, surely, rather than Jack the Ripper? Because that's 50 years ago. It's not 19th century.
Right.
Or one of the weird cases like the Doodler serial killer case from the 70s in San Francisco, which has the added intrigue of an alleged seriously famous Hollywood celebrity who wasn't out of the closet at the time, who survived an attack from this gay serial killer. And so that one is the other three, they're just crazy cases. I'm scratching my head. I don't understand what's going on with any of those ones. And then you're there as this lovely bookend to the end of this particular drop. And so it's very strange, Tobias. I mean, that one, even, as I'm sure you're aware, were you surprised that they looked at Jack the Ripper as well?
Well, it is different production companies handle each episode, right? And so that might be surprising for people to hear. Like each has its own director and
Yes.
its own crew and everything. And so, I wasn't really privy to the decision making that would go into selecting those episodes. Although it's funny because all of the criticisms that you have with that particular selection, like that's what all of my friends have said. That's what everybody I know has said. And I'm like, was I in that one? I had no say, like, okay.
Why couldn't you have sorted it, Tobias? What's going on?
Yeah, right. No, I mean, I agree. Like it's kind of a weird choice. I think that, I haven't heard anything about Jack the Ripper for a while. And so I have to wonder if maybe the thought process there was something like, well, we are appealing to this mainstream audience, and maybe there are people out there who aren't very well versed in this, and so we can provide something of a basis or lay the groundwork or something for people to become interested in this. Although I'm with you on that. It does seem a little silly to say if you have information that could help,
yes.
resolve this case, please reach out to us, because I would be very interested to see who is reaching out, who has new info. Like the Mothman Revisited makes sense because there are new sightings. Like I'm still actively investigating winged humanoid sightings all over, and so there's new information there. Like things are happening. But yeah, I haven't seen much progress in Jack the Ripper or any new clues or anything pop up. So who knows? We'll see, I guess.
It gets solved every 10 years over here in the UK because there's always a new documentary and somebody said, oh, well, I think it's Brian Johnson, the butcher, and here's my case. And we get one of them all the time over here in the UK. And it usually turns out not to be Brian the butcher. It's just very circumstantial evidence.
Sure.
And I suppose, to be fair, you make a very good point there. I think sometimes we can look at these kinds of shows, Tobias, in the prism of our knowledge. And therefore, for us, we're like, oh, not again. Come on, let's move on. Whereas, as you make a perfectly reasonable point there, there's probably lots of people around the world who may be not that well versed in Jack the Ripper. And so... Yes, I think you've made a stringent defence of their decision, Tobias, and I withdraw my previous comments.
Sure, I promise. They didn't pay me to say that. That's just from my limited experience behind the camera, seeing how television works. So
how did they reach out? Did they? This is as we were saying, this is the crucial thing. And as I said, I don't mean this disrespectfully. I was just surprised because they've done probably one spooky episode or Fortean related show probably in every sort of drop that they've done. And some of them have been a bit like, whoa, and some of them have been a bit, well, I'm not really sure about this one. So it was very surprising because they've not really touched cryptids at all, really, other than the Paranormal Rangers episode. They've kind of just dealt with ghosts and UFOs. So for me, for it to be their sort of first real cryptid themed episode, it seems a bit left field. It's more our kind of strangeness because it's one of those that people like us are very aware of it. Obviously, you've spoken to dozens of witnesses over this particular case, Tobias. Whereas I would imagine, once again, the general public would be thinking about something like a lake monster or a big hairy hominid. But they've gone straight into weird flying humanoid bat-like creatures.
Yeah, it was a big swing, I think, honestly. Like they really went all out and put a lot on the line, picking a subject as esoteric as Mothman, because you're absolutely right. Normal people, like they don't know who Mothman is. Like my parents didn't know who Mothman was before I was writing about it, and even people in the paranormal, like if somebody is very interested in ghosts or something, and they watch a lot of television surrounding ghosts and hauntings, they probably have never heard of Mothman. And so it's a very sort of fringe of the fringe kind of subject. But what I think made it so attractive to them was the ongoing, like, current nature of this investigation. And I'm not going to lie, like, it matters how you present yourself. And so when they were looking at this, they found our website, of course, designed by lovely and talented wife Emily.
Yes.
And it's a good looking website. It looks very professional, and I mentioned that because every single producer I have ever spoken to, they always mention that. They go, "Hey, we went to your website. Wow, that looks really good. You guys seem very professional." And so if you're interested in making yourself marketable to television producers and things, have a nice professional presence online, with professional design and marketing and layout and all of that stuff. Because what happened was they reached out to me via email, I believe, which is the normal way that people will contact us, and just said that they were interested in these Mothman sightings and would I be willing to talk about it. And that happens a lot, actually. And it doesn't usually make it as far as television. I think a lot of producers will just kind of fish for info, and if they can get any kind of free information that then they can use after cutting you out, like, they are more than willing to waste your time to do that. But Unsolved Mysteries wasn't like that. I think that they have, for instance, they don't have a talking head or set of talking heads or whatever on every single episode to center the narrative of that episode around. And so they do need to have investigators and witnesses and things front and center every single time, because there's no host or actor, model, investigators or whatever to be centered around. And so I feel like that was a big part in why they wanted to reach out to us, was because they needed credible people, and they were interested in the story. And the more that I spoke with them, the more I think they became convinced that there was something to this, because I fulfilled all of my promises when I say that there are real people that have really experienced something that they can't explain. And yes, they are willing to talk to you. I'm not kidding. And there were, and they did. And so I think that goes a long way, because I'm sure that something that these producers have to deal with a lot are cranks who make big promises that are never fulfilled. And so being able to do that gives you a lot of credibility that is seemingly very much appreciated.
I suspect that probably the most daunting aspect of all this, Tobias, is once you've got that connection from them and they've said, right, we'd like to do an episode on this, and they've already, like you say, they've sounded you out and made sure there's no skeletons rattling around in that closet. For you to then go to some of the witnesses who have trusted you implicitly with their experiences, because this is the key thing about this case in particular, more than any, I think, in the modern era, certainly, because I think along with Dogman over the last 30 years, seeing something outside of the normal parameters of what people presume to be a cryptid, automatically people seem to treat them with suspicion, because they're describing creatures that we have no fossil record for. One of the big defenses about lake monsters and sea monsters and hairy hominids around the world is that we have fossil records of strange giant creatures of both varieties that have lived on this planet at some point in our history. Nobody has yet uncovered, that's not to say we won't, nobody has yet to uncover any kind of dogman-like creature or a giant human bat-shaped creature as yet. Now, obviously, we know that there have been numerous weird-looking flying creatures over history. One only has to take a brief look at the whole dinosaur pteranodon selection, and some of the creatures and the sizes of them were terrifying. And even if we go into the modern era, you've still got incredible, strange bird-like creatures such as moas and the Haast eagle, which, any eagle that eats a 9-foot moa I don't want to ever see something that big, Tobias. And thankfully that's died out because the moa's died out, allegedly. But there are giant birds seen all over, especially in the southern states of the US. Down into Mexico, you've got strange, weird flying creatures seen over the jungles of South America, Africa, Asia. And so this seems to have really caught fire, like you say, from sort of 2017 onwards. But one of the key aspects that you've always been excellent in, both yourself and Emily, is when you go out, you don't just take a story on face value, because as you say, you will get hoaxers, fakers, jokers, people pulling your leg, people with malicious intent, regardless, Tobias, who want for no other reason to enjoy you getting egg on your face. And I can say that about all researchers of strange phenomenon. There will always be people out there that will try and trip you up somehow. And yet, if you were just sat behind a desk and not following anything up, that could easily happen. But the reason you've ended up getting these half a dozen people to come on to the show are you've spoke to them, you've earned their trust, you've told them that they're going to be all right speaking on this show, and they have. Everybody's come out of it simply coming across as a very balanced person with mostly very clear close-up sightings. We're not saying somebody's, as you say in the show, you got that GoPro footage from that guy saying, I think I've seen Mothman in the sky. You went through it, you stopped it, you checked it, you zoomed in. It's a bird. But we both know that there would be people out there in this particular field who would put that forward as evidence easily. But you don't do that, Tobias.
No, I think that's very, very important. As I am fond of saying, if we don't explain the things we can, why would anybody ever believe us about the things we can't? And so it's very, very important. It is crucial, really, that we find prosaic explanations for reported phenomena if and when they exist. I mean, with that Pilsen neighborhood sighting in particular, that was very valuable, because what that allowed me to do was create this sighting profile. Because up until that point, we had been receiving kind of two kinds of sightings. You had these nighttime sightings of something very close, often on the ground with glowing red eyes and other weird associated sort of paranormal phenomena. And then you had these daytime sightings of something big flying relatively far away that didn't really have any of the other weird stuff that I would, or most people would, associate with a Mothman sighting, right? And so I had long suspected that many of those daytime sightings could represent misidentified, like, large birds, but I didn't have any proof. And I'm not the kind of person who wants to go around making like declarative statements if I don't have evidence for something. That's why I am reluctant to write things off as a hoax, because most of the time when somebody says something is a hoax, what they really mean is that we don't have enough information about it, and thus they aren't convinced. It's relatively rare to actually have hard evidence that somebody is faking something. But anyway, so for that to come out then, and for me to finally have this video evidence that I could point to and go, okay, so this testimony perfectly matches what we're getting from all of these other like daytime witnesses, and the video evidence that they have provided really shows that what this is a misidentified large bird. And I say misidentified because I don't think that this witness was lying to me. I didn't have any indication that he was lying. I think that this was likely an honest misidentification. He thought he saw something other than what he had seen. And so finally, we have this video evidence that allows me to go, okay, so all of these other sightings that are almost exactly like this one, those are probably misidentified birds. Pretty safe to say that at this point. And we no longer have to wonder why they don't match the potentially paranormal ones. So that was huge. That was a big deal. It's actually very, very valuable to find that. And what I found in addition is most photographic evidence that people present for winged humanoids or Mothman or whatever falls into that category. It's almost always something, well, every single one that I have ever seen personally has had some kind of prosaic explanation. So it could be a large bird. It could be an insect, like butterflies actually end up accounting for a good number of winged humanoid photographs, because what will happen is somebody's photographing something and they don't notice this butterfly because they're relatively small and fast, flying in front of their camera, and so they don't see anything with the naked eye, but they go back and review their photograph later, and they go, oh, what is this? And because it's flying, it can be difficult to gauge how far away it is. But based on the shape and blurriness and the witness testimony, where like they don't recall seeing anything with the naked eye, which is always suspicious. It's pretty easy to determine that these are mostly butterflies, which really, I think, to me, it doesn't diminish the value of other people's experiences if we're talking about the potentially paranormal experiences, because to speak to your point about the fossil record earlier, that kind of evidence would presuppose that what we're dealing with is some kind of undiscovered biological species, when all of the evidence we have would seem to indicate otherwise. So everything from the description of what people are seeing, the 6 to 7 foot tall humanoid with 12 to 15 foot wingspan shouldn't be able to fly. Like, even if it had hollow bones, like that's too much mass to fly, really. And then all of the other like associated weird paranormal stuff, everything from the glowing red eyes, which yes, now like eye shine is a thing, but I'm always careful to cover that with witnesses, where I'm like, well, was it eye shine? Was there some source of illumination? Because some animals do have red eye shine, which I imagine is very creepy if you're surprised by it.
Yes.
But it's something that I'm always very careful to cover. Like, well, okay, well, did it look like this, which is what eye shine looks like? Was there a source of like illumination that could have caused that? And almost universally, the people who report these glowing red eyes are like, no, it seemed like it was glowing from within. So if you think of like the difference between seeing a raccoon at night and seeing a light bulb, like that big of a difference. And then you've got the unexplained fear that seems to defy reason, sometimes beginning before the sighting has even happened. Palpable senses of evil, haunting and poltergeist phenomena that seem to follow people, before or after their sightings, associated UFO sightings and related phenomena, all of this other stuff that isn't something you would normally associate with a mundane biological species. So, and I think Dogman to a certain degree probably falls into that same category, because evolutionarily it makes no sense for a canine to like stand up and walk as a biped, especially like not without, well, just the whole thing doesn't make any sense, because half the time you get people describing their legs as sort of being like dog legs if they were, if a dog was standing up, but like those legs are specifically evolved to walk on all fours, which is why you don't see my dogs up walking around on two legs very often, because it's not a good like mode of locomotion for them.
No.
So you have like some of these cryptids, which I think, depending on your definition of cryptid, if you are a strict sort of traditionalist in cryptozoology and you demand that a cryptid be a like undiscovered biological species, then these aren't cryptids by that definition. I usually just use the word monster because it's a good umbrella term.
Yeah.
But I think that they defy biology in a way that that means that we should at least consider other weirder possibilities.
Well, of course. I mean, as you say, the stringent term for cryptozoology is it's either something that is an animal of some description, or lizard or bird, or we have a fossilized throwback at some point and it's just disappeared, such as a mammoth or Gigantopithecus, whatever. And so it is interesting, I think, when you sort of begin to break this down, because like you say, you can sort of mush it all into the general cryptid term. You can specify it's, as you say there, it's more of a monster than anything else because we don't have anything that we can refer it to. I mean, that's before we even get into this. Is it coming from a parallel dimension? Are they aliens? Are these transcendental beings that are popping up? Are they here and we just don't see them certain times of the year because the veil isn't thin enough for them, Tobias? And so it's very easy, I think, sometimes to get bogged down in the pigeonhole, because we both know that people argue about whether dogmen are werewolf or werewolf are dogmen, and I'm like, well, and then people will say, well, they're not, they're different things. I'm like, how do you know this? How do you know that a werewolf and a dogman aren't the same thing? Because everything I know about werewolves suggests that if you see one, you're not going to be around to tell us about it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think what people are often guilty of in this field, unfortunately, and by this field I mean the entirety of paranormality, right? So
yes.
Well, in the true Fortean sense, I kind of include everything together. So yes. When I say the paranormal, I mean UFOs and cryptids and ghosts and parapsychology and everything else.
Yeah.
I think what people are often guilty of is trying to explain one mystery with another. And so it's not helpful for us to say that Dogman is a werewolf, because what the hell is a werewolf then? We're no closer to understanding anything at that point.
No.
And we see that across the board in every subject. I'll have people who will contact me and be like, well, I think Mothman is a demon. And then I'm like, great, well, what's a demon? And if you tell me to read the Bible, I'm going to pull my hair out, because that's not getting us any closer either.
No.
It's something that I wish people did less, but I understand. I fundamentally really do understand, because there is this human need to understand. And there is this natural predilection that people have towards contextualizing these phenomena in a way that makes sense to them. And of course, it's going to be informed by their own internal biases, because to a large degree, our personalities and our thought processes are molded by our internal biases, the things that we have been sort of indoctrinated into. And I don't mean that in any sort of like malevolent sense, but just in the way that our whole lives, often we are taught that things work a certain way, or we are introduced to media that has specific narratives. And so when you are suddenly confronted by something that exists in defiance of everything that you've been taught your whole life to understand, then you have to try to contextualize it still within that paradigm. And that's, I think, how we get people going, oh, well, Dogman is a werewolf. Well, okay, I mean, I get it. Like, you think you know what werewolves are, and so that is a way, at least for you, to make sense of this otherwise inexplicable thing, or calling everything demons or whatever. It's a very human reaction to something that otherwise I think would be a little more difficult to cope with, probably.
Yeah, I suppose it that kind of attitude as well, Tobias, goes hand in hand with revisionism that we often see in this kind of thing as well. Once again, people in their particular beliefs in our field will try and explain away things that they don't investigate as being their phenomenon, not what people are saying. I suppose this is difficult in this particular aspect. Maybe not so much for the witnesses, Tobias, because obviously a lot of them had no idea what they'd seen. They just didn't. And nobody referred to Point Pleasant at all. This is the other interesting thing. And even if they did, why would people start making stuff up about something that happened 50 years ago in a different state, several hundred miles away, which has no relevance to where the majority of the modern sightings are occurring? Obviously, there are more sightings in other areas of the world, but obviously this particular one, the fulcrum seems to be the Chicago, Lake Michigan area and the wider populace in that particular point. And so that, even so, you would say, well, why would these people make it up? And the one thing that is really strong in this particular episode is the fact that everybody seems completely baffled by what they saw, as well as the fact that every single person, when they try to talk about it with people who are supposed to love and understand and care for them, every single one was made to feel as though they were absolutely bananas, and they were either making it up, hallucinating, overtired, have you checked your medication, I think you might be drinking too much. Every excuse we hear all the time when anybody sees a creature or has a strange experience that the normal parameters of explanation cannot deal with.
Yeah, no, I mean, I can tell you that the vast majority of people who have contacted me are not familiar with Mothman as a phenomenon. They have never heard of the Point Pleasant sightings because, again, these are not well-known sightings outside of our little weird circle, the fringe of the fringe, like that's who knows about this. I mean, maybe more people know about it now with the popularity of something like Unsolved Mysteries, but prior to that, very, very few people outside of just us weirdos were familiar with it. And so what usually happens is somebody will have an experience like this. And like you said, they want to tell somebody about it. These are impactful experiences. They change people's lives for better or often worse. And it's only natural as a social species that they want to confide in someone. They want validation. They want to talk to somebody and have that person say, wow, that's really interesting, but I believe something happened to you. But like you said, what happens instead, they go to a loved one, a parent, a sibling, spouse, whatever, and they get laughed at because I think either people don't understand the gravity of the experience for the person who experienced it, or it is so far outside of their comfort zone, what they allow as possible, that their only defense is to laugh. It's laugh or it's laugh or scream a lot of the time in this field. If you really if you let yourself feel the full weight of a lot of what people are reporting. But that's ultimately, of course, unsatisfying for the experiencer because that's not what they needed. And so assuming that nobody else has ever seen anything like this, they just kind of bottle it up and they try to go on with their lives. And then if they're lucky, they see something that somebody like us has put out. Maybe it's an article I've written or a podcast that you've aired or something similar. And they go, wow, okay, I'm not alone. Somebody else has seen this, because again, they had no idea that anybody else was seeing anything similar to this. And at that point, they feel empowered to reach out because they think that they will be taken seriously. And if they're lucky enough to connect with somebody like us, then they absolutely will be. And that is most often how people end up finding me. It's not because they had a prior interest in Mothman. It's because something has happened to them and they desperately want to have some understanding of it, or at the very least, if there's no understanding to be had, they just want to be heard. And so, yeah, like I said, finding a safe space to do that is important, and that's how we end up connecting with all of these witnesses.
I mean, I was struck when I was listening to the people and they were explaining that kind of reaction that they'd had, Tobias, and it reminded me of one of the stories I read in one of Preston Dennett's recent books, where a daughter and her father had this incredible tight bond as she was growing up, and he would tell her all about space and strange things and all sorts. And a few months down the line, she had a sighting where a UFO landed in a field near where she lived, and an occupant came out. She saw it saw her, it jumped back in the craft, took off. She ran straight home, and the first person, obviously, she's going to tell is her dad. And she tells him everything that's happened and all that. All the family's there, and he just destroys her. He just basically said, oh, was it Superman? Did he fly into this? And basically just completely belittled her and her experience instantly and just killed it. And I think she didn't talk about it then for another 40 years until she'd seen Preston on another show tell a very similar story from somewhere close to where she lived. And therefore that was the catalyst for her to open up 40 years afterwards. And you see this quite a lot. And we hear it quite a lot. You probably more than most, Tobias, because you speak to people who have had very odd experiences in general, more than I normally do. And so for me, I suppose the fact that these people have agreed to go on the show after speaking with yourself is incredibly brave. It's the bravest thing you can do in our field as someone who isn't an investigator, a researcher, an interviewer, because you're the person that is now telling all the world what's happened to you, whether they believe it or not. And we're not there to look after them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. You know, it's one thing for me as an investigator to go on television and talk about a phenomenon, because there's a degree of separation there. You know, it's more difficult if you were going to try to mock someone to, I think, mock me, because I'm not claiming anything. You know, I'm just saying, well, this is a subject in which I'm interested in. Here's the work that I've done on it. You know, take it for what you will. I am not ascribing any particular explanation, nor am I subscribing to any particular belief based on this. But when you are an experiencer, to put yourself out there in that way takes a lot of courage, because you are putting it all on the line at that point. Something like Unsolved Mysteries, of course, gets very wide distribution throughout the entire world. And so you're talking about untold millions of people who are going to see this, and you're going on the record. If it took place near where you live, which every single one of these witnesses' experiences did, people know your hometown now. People in your hometown are going to recognize you. And so I think it speaks to the power of these experiences. You know, some of these people were people that initially didn't even want to be on the record when I was writing about them, who decided later that they would be willing to come out after a certain amount of time had passed. And I think it speaks to the level of trust that I have been able to establish with some of these witnesses. And that's not to brag as though I'm special. Yes. Literally anybody who goes into this deciding, and this is a conscious decision that you have to make, that people are deserving of dignity and are deserving of respect, and then acting like that is going to be able to establish trust with witnesses. So when you say, hey, I have this television project, and I've spoken to these producers, and they seem like they're on the level, and I think we can trust them, and I don't think that they're going to try to make you look stupid, they listen to you. And I think in this case, it worked out very well, because having watched that episode, I thought that these witnesses were presented in a way that was very respectful, and it did treat them with dignity, and it did take their experiences seriously without trying to explain them, because there aren't any easy explanations yet.
No. I also liked the variety of the sightings that are included in this particular episode, Tobias. They're not all the same, because obviously you've got Paula and Jonathan's experiences, which you could say are quite similar. They both seem to be doing the mundane reality of chores when clearly Mothman's not impressed by how they're dealing with their trash in certain situations. And I think this is the great thing about some of these kind of experiences. It's the normality of a situation that is impacted by something completely inexplicable appearing. I mean, like earlier on, I was laughing. I was putting my recycling bin out because it's bin day tomorrow. And I just rewatched the episode again, and I was thinking, well, I hope if he turns up, he can give me a hand with the other bin, you know? That's all I'm bothered about. Whereas I just go, yeah, well, that's fair enough, you know, it is what it is. But I think every single nobody's doing anything. Of the 5 cases that we look at, the only thing that connects them is the normality of the situation before it gets weird. But Paula and Jonathan are obviously quite similar because they're both in a domestic setting. They're both very close up, which is the other aspect of these sightings as well in the majority, Tobias, that a lot of the witnesses are 20, 30 feet away at most. You know, they're not mistaking seeing a sandhill crane or a heron that's having to find a new habitat. These are people who are seeing things very close up that even if you just look at the size and dimensions of whatever they're seeing, it's in such close proximity that they can't misidentify a bird or a butterfly or some balloons that have flown free from a tether. These are almost face-to-face encounters, especially Jonathan and Paula's.
Yeah, no, I think that is spot on. That is the sort of definition of the difference between these potentially paranormal sightings and the daytime largely misidentified bird or other animal sightings. There's a very, very stark contrast between the distance of the creature. There's a stark contrast in the effect that this sighting has on the witness. You know, speaking of Paula and Jonathan specifically, they both had extreme reactions, understandable, but extreme reactions to their sightings. Like they felt like they were in mortal peril during these experiences, and that is much less common, if not completely unheard of, during the misidentification profile of sightings. So yeah, I think that everything about that sort of speaks to the credibility of their experience, at least insofar as, like I always say, they really did experience something they can't explain. And that is as much theorizing as I am usually willing to do in terms of what may have actually happened to them, because I think there are a variety of possibilities. But the one thing that is inarguable to me is that there is some experience at the heart of this that these people have undergone, and that's what's important.
I suppose one of the other aspects of everybody that's come through it, and I suppose when you're a touchstone for people to approach you with their experiences, Tobias, it's all right getting it off your chest and talking to somebody about it. How many more of them then continue to kind of try and solve it, even though we know that it's not that easy, it's not that simple, or they feel so relieved because they finally found someone who won't laugh at them or tell them that they need to speak to their doctor about their medication or asking if they've had a heavy night or whatever. It allows them to suddenly realise that they can talk about it freely. Does the conversation progress? Does it still continue? Or is it a case of occasionally they'll drop in? Or is it, as with anything, it's not a one-size-fits-all? Some people, once they unbridle themselves, are fine. Other people, they just need to keep in touch just in case.
Yeah, it's some of the last one, really. Some people, I think, having sort of absolved themselves of the weight of this experience through being able to discuss it with someone, never want to revisit it. I think that it is easier, and understandably so, for them to, having had that cathartic release, to just move on and make their peace with the fact that this is going to be something that they will never forget, but will likely also never get true closure on. And so the best thing they can do is anything else other than thinking about it. But there are people who I think always wonder what it could be, and they are willing to try to continue to explain their experience through their own research, their own investigation. And I applaud that. I don't think there's any right or wrong approach for these folks. I think that they should do whatever they are comfortable with and whatever brings them any kind of peace, in the short time we have on this earth, honestly. And so for those people who have sort of a continuing interest, they do stay in touch, like there are witnesses from that episode actually that have reached out a few times. Sometimes it's just to share a funny anecdote, like, oh, the people in my hometown are dressing up like Mothman and running around now, or something similar. But yeah, well, that's the thing too. Like these are human beings,
yeah.
and you form relationships with them, and so these are real friendships in a lot of ways. Like these are people now that I've known for years, and in a lot of cases, I've been to their homes. They've welcomed me into their lives, and so there's a real connection there. So even for some folks, even if they weren't interested in continuing their exploration of this phenomenon, there's that relationship doesn't end just because this episode of Unsolved Mysteries has aired. We're human beings, like these are real connections. So there's always some level of contact, even if it's just to send me an interesting story they saw or something similar. But I will say this, in terms of people who develop a serious interest in the paranormal, who want to become investigators as a result of their Mothman sightings, that, in my experience, is extremely rare. If it does happen, I have not seen it, because most of these people with whom I have worked largely want to move on with their lives. They want whatever understanding they can get. And once they feel as though they have received as much as they are likely to, then they want to just move on.
I'm not surprised. I suppose people could scoff at this, Tobias, but I think there's clearly an issue of PTSD involved in this, because when you see something like this that you've no frame of reference for, as I said with Paula and Jonathan, that surprises you in the dark, doing a boring chore that we all have to do, to go from that realization of reality to having everything turned on its head, to then being so overcome with fear that the only overriding thought you've got is, I just need to get to the door, as Paula says in her interview. That isn't somebody getting spooked by an owl or anything like that. And people could say, oh, well, it's dark, they're confused. Paula might have just got up. She might be having a waking dream. Yeah, it's a waking dream where she can take the bin halfway there and then see something strange. Make the rules right, Please make even a skeptical explanation has to make sense.
Right.
You can't have a waking dream halfway through taking the rubbish out. And so when you look at, say, somebody like Stacey and Sandra's experience, theirs happened once again. Family walk, having a nice day. It's as clear can be, Tobias. That's nobody having a waking dream. And if it is, why is everybody having a waking dream? So straight away, we can't use that excuse anymore. So clearly, it has to be an owl or a crane, does it not? And they're just wrong.
Yeah, that is frustrating. I wish that more people were comfortable sitting with the unknown, because that's where I live most of the time. Honestly, I don't have an easy explanation for what has happened to these people. I am not completely resistant to the idea that there is some sort of undiscovered yet prosaic explanation that could exist. I don't know, a new type of shared hallucination or cultural effect or something. Sure, great, fine, prove it. That's the issue. And so for me, and I wish that more people were willing to do this, what I'm left with is saying, I don't know. And it's the only honest answer. And I think it's the only one that we should be willing to give definitively in these cases. Like I think it's fun to speculate. I'm more than willing to speculate about anything from mass hysteria to interdimensional beings to saucer occupants or whatever people want to talk about in relation to these sightings and why I think they are more or less likely to explain anything. But at the end of the day, we simply don't know. And it is no more honest to try to dismiss something from within an established scientific paradigm without evidence to support that dismissal than it is for someone to create an explanation out of whole cloth that speaks to some kind of invisible universe or something similar. And I'm kind of sick of people pretending like it is, just pulling some BS sort of scientific explanation, quote unquote scientific explanation, out of the ether and presenting that as though it explains something without any actual evidence to support it is something that I think we see way too often, especially in this field and certainly surrounding these sightings. I mean, that Sandhill Crane sighting or hypothesis to explain the sightings rather goes all the way back to West Virginia in the 60s. And it didn't make any sense then, and it still doesn't make any sense today. But it's the kind of lazy, dismissive explanation that armchair researchers and investigators love to trot out to seem smarter than all of these yokels having these bizarre Mothman experiences, right? And it's frustrating in that it doesn't get us any closer to the truth. It's not helping anything, and so I just wish people would knock it off.
Yeah. I suppose as well, for every witness that's in this particular episode as well, these are women or marginalised communities that are being interviewed. These are not the normal people, Tobias. These are not, the usual kind of talking heads we get in a strange mass experience normally. You've got mother and daughter, you've got friends, you've got people on their own, you've got two women out on a family day trip. You've got one woman cleaning up after a barbecue. These are all people whose voices very rarely in the past would have been listened to anyway because of who they are. Now, as things unburden themselves and we finally begin to see a real recognition of real equality across the board for peoples of all backgrounds and choices in their lives, I was also struck by that. I thought that was quite an interesting dynamic to have. I've no problem at all with that, as I've seen before. We all know that there are people in the past that have completely dismissed people because of who they are. Sandra Mancy is a prime example. People would say, well, she was just a bored housewife desperate for attention. How do you know that? You've no idea. You can't just say that about people. Because this is the other thing as well. These people get dragged all over the place in certain circles online. There will be people out there who will be talking that particular episode who'll be making the most horrific character assassinations about them, their lives, their hobbies, their lifestyles, their intelligence, Tobias, even down to what job they do or even the car they drive. That for some reason we can't trust these people because they don't have a PhD in psychology. And so you get somebody talking about them saying, oh, well, it's all in their heads and all that. But no, you're making that presumption because all these people's sightings are similar, but they're all very different. As I said about Stacey and Sandra, I'm struck by Stacey saying in that it looked like Iron Man, whereas everybody else is kind of describing what we would expect. She clearly says humanoid, flying humanoid. It looked like Iron Man. So whilst it's similar, that's clearly, it would seem, Tobias, that that's something else that's going on. So it's a variety of flying humanoids that people are reporting?
Well, yeah, and that's sort of always been the case, honestly. To speak to the first point, I never thought about that in terms of how the episode turned out. It didn't occur to me that I had just happened to include these witnesses that may not be like traditional witnesses. And by traditional witnesses, we all know that we're talking about like older white men, right? And that would mean that that people would take them less seriously, because I certainly never did. I get a variety of witnesses from many different backgrounds and socio-economic backgrounds and similar. Like, the witnesses with whom I've spoken could be literally anybody at all. They might go to your church. They could work in your office. You would pass them in the grocery store and you wouldn't look twice. They could be anyone. They could be your mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, best friends, anybody at all. And so I think it just so happened that this turned out, to be representative of the populations that it did. And I would be very frustrated, I think, for people to dismiss their testimony out of hand based on any form of bigotry. I would like to think that we can be better than that. And I think as a field, we do need to work on being more inclusive. That's something that I very much believe in. It's something that, I've got some great friends who also very strongly believe in that, and they're working. We're all working, but to make this field more inclusive, and it's led to projects like the Feminine Macabre.
Yes.
Like Emily has always done the covers for those. Our friend Amanda Woomer, of course, is the mastermind behind those collections. But
Yes.
they are, it's a collection of works done entirely by women and non-binary persons in the paranormal, which is great because you don't hear those perspectives very often. It's very rare to get perspectives from the Black community, from any indigenous community.
Yeah.
But boy, do people like to talk about like the indigenous communities and
yes.
what they may or may not believe.
Yes.
There's no shortage of people who want to talk on their behalf.
Yes.
But actually including them in the conversation, oh boy, why would you do that, right? There's a lot of work to be done there, but I'm happy to see that there are some people who are very interested in actually, making some progress.
Yes.
in those areas. And so, there's reason for optimism. But in terms of the sightings themselves and some of those disparities, there's always been some variation to a greater or lesser degree between what people are describing in these sightings. Some of them match up pretty well, like say Paula, Jonathan, Shayna, and Barbara, like all of their sightings
Yes.
match up reasonably well. And then there are outliers like our Iron Man. Now there have been other sightings as part of this investigation that have had wildly different descriptions than what you might expect. Everything from scaly sort of bat dragon humanoids to Bigfoot with long leathery wings, right?
Mm.
And what I would say there is, now, if you go back to 1966 and 67, right, when this all began, well, ostensibly when this all began, we have sightings older than that now, but
Yes.
anyway, and you read Keel and you read the kinds of things he was writing about and the kinds of ideas that he was putting forward, right? I think that you should consider something like the ultra-terrestrial hypothesis, for instance, right? Like, people forget about that all the time, and I don't know why, because it is an integral part of the Mothman mythology at this point, right? Is this ultra-terrestrial hypothesis. And it's not even usually what people think it is, because the defining qualities of the ultra-terrestrials are not just that they share this space with us, that they share this planet with us, just from a dimension that we're not privy to, but also that they are reflective of our own subconscious, that they seemingly purposely anyway, appear in a variety of forms based on either our expectations or their needs, and sometimes, again, seemingly in a way that might be meant to manipulate us, either into certain actions or certain beliefs or something similar. And so if you consider that, if you apply that ultra-terrestrial hypothesis to these sightings, then all of a sudden, some of this begins to make a little more sense, right? So you should have a variety of descriptions from witnesses, right? There should be differences in their testimony if what you're dealing with is some intelligence whose appearance is based in part on our own subconscious needs and biases, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not saying that is true. I don't have evidence for it, but I think it's something to consider, because people, especially because of the cultural phenomenon that Mothman has become, like Mothman has taken the internet by storm. The Mothman Festival in Point Pleasant every September has never been more popular than it is. And with that has come, because we are very visual creatures, has come this image of what Mothman is supposed to look like. But that's never been true. It wasn't even true back in the 60s. People's descriptions were all over the place, even back then.
Yeah.
And so we've never had consensus on what Mothman is supposed to look like. We just have people who think we do, and those people are mistaken and should probably, do a little more reading, be a little more open-minded. I mean, that's my general advice for everybody, including myself sometimes. So.
Yes, I agree. No, it is strange, because if you say the best example of this is the statue in Point Pleasant of Mothman doesn't resemble the majority of witnesses that Keel interviews at all, and it certainly doesn't have any connection with what the majority of people are seeing in the Chicago area either, Tobias. But for some people, that's Mothman. That's what it is, and it's like Nessie. We've got one picture of a head is allegedly a fake. However, the story, as we were talking about people claiming hoaxes are hoaxes, there is more evidence to suggest that the fake story is fake than the actual original, which was a very interesting conversation I had with Dr. Carl Schuker, who I wasn't aware of that, but there are lots of people who think that story is less believable than the floating submarine alleged explanation. But you get this all over the place, and I've spoken to other researchers. The Lake Worth monster in Texas. There's 4 people come forward and said they did that. Well, 3 of those people are lying, because it can't be all 4 of them, can it?
Right, of course.
And this is the other aspect about some of these things that I often find fascinating. That people, as we were saying, people swallow explanations, Tobias, for weird things because they just can't explain them, or it's outside of their parameters of rationality. That some people will come forward and come up with the most ludicrous explanations, or you will get characters who will insert themselves into the story so they get the adulation. It's Munchausen's syndrome, basically, that you want to be seen, you want to be noticed, and therefore these people come forward with very little evidence to support what they're saying and say, oh no, that was me. We've got the UFO flap we had in Wales in 1977. Somebody came forward and said, oh yeah, that was me walking about in a silver suit. But that only explains one sighting. Everything else is, and people go, oh well, it was that guy in a suit. What was he doing? Flying a UFO as well? Where did he get that from? Was he floating around somebody's bedroom window and out at sea and all? No. Yeah, and it's you think, right, with the greatest respect, if you want to creep around somewhere at 3 a.m. in the UK, it's not the place where the only people who have licensed firearms live. Because most farmers have a shotgun, Tobias here, and they're usually the only people that will have a gun outside of the police force. I ain't creeping around their house at 3 a.m. in the morning dressed like a silly bugger. I don't know about this guy. But you get it all the time. We've had it with the stories down in Missouri and Florida that people have gone, oh yeah, that was me wearing certain footprints. Or how many people came forward and said that they were Patty? and not one of them could provide the suit.
Right? Yeah, nobody ever.
You can come forward and say it, but you've also got to prove it. So if you're going to do that kind of thing, if you're going to admit to being the hoaxer, you've got to prove it. You can't just say it. And when people accept their explanations, that's as infuriating as when we see people who are clearly making stories up. You know, you can often see them coming a mile away, Tobias, as I'm sure you...
I agree. Yeah, I mean, that's something we've seen in this investigation, actually, is people coming forward wanting to insert themselves into the narrative by claiming things are hoaxes. And usually it's that they'll say, oh, well, there's not enough information about this sighting, so it has to be a hoax. And it's like, well, you didn't investigate anything, so I don't know why your opinion should carry any weight.
Precisely. And often the hoaxes stories are, as I said, the Lake Worth monster is a prime example off the top of my head. You can't have four people doing it, because eventually one day you're going to end up like that poor chap several years ago who got run over pretending to be a Bigfoot somewhere, dressed in a ghillie suit, because I haven't heard of many people trying that again, with the greatest of respect, because and I still can't get my head around that explanation either, Tobias, that they say to people, especially when it's hunters, when we're talking about people who are often dismissed, hunters are always dismissed, because apparently they're all ignorant, who don't have any talent. And I'm thinking, well, if there's somebody who's been hunting professionally for 50 years, I'd say they're a very talented person, to be fair. And I certainly won't go wandering around certain parts of North America with just a gun for protection, Tobias. I've seen what lives there.
Sure. There's an element of classism that you see
every time
in the examination of these of these kinds of experiences, everything from cryptids to UFOs to everything else, right? Where, again, a lot of armchair researchers have decided that people don't know, like especially rural people, have no idea what's living in their own environment that they exist in every single day. Often in the case of a hunter, at weird hours where you're likely, if there's a scary owl or something, you're going to see it at the times or hear it at the times you would be out hunting or something. So you should have experience with that. You're unlikely to be suddenly frightened by something like that and then unable to explain it.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's I think it is very much rooted in classism and this sort of elitist perspective that nobody outside of any ivory tower could possibly understand what is happening to themselves.
I know. The amount of bear hunters in America that apparently don't understand what a bear looks like is remarkable, right. It would seem, Tobias. I'm amazed America isn't overrun with bears if nobody knows what they look like.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we are. We don't know what they look like.
That's the thing. That's what we're all seeing. We're not seeing bears. We're seeing Dogman is a bear. Obvious.
Yeah, it's all bears.
It's a different type.
It's all bears.
It's no longer owls. It's bears, Tobias. This is the new thing. I think the last witness I want to touch on before I let you go, my friend, is Roxanne. Now, I might have got the wrong end of the stick in regards to this, but Roxanne strikes me as someone that's come forward after everything else has come out in the last few years and basically sat on this story for quite a while. Am I correct in presuming that?
She did. Yeah, she did. I just spoke to her. It would have been several years ago, but her sighting happened in 2001. So, she had sat on it for nearly two decades, before speaking with me. But that's not in and of itself unusual. There are plenty of witnesses who have had that experience because, like we talked about before, what makes this job so difficult sometimes is people don't know who to reach out to, and they assume nobody else has ever seen anything like this. And so they just have this tendency to sit on these stories for years and years until they find somebody that they can finally tell it to.
So how was it for her, I suppose, because her sighting is very unique, especially compared to everybody else in that particular episode as well. For anybody who's not had a chance to see it yet, what did Roxanne report? What happened to her, Tobias?
Sure. So essentially what she had said was after a family barbecue, she was cleaning up outside. She was by herself, and she saw these 4 black-winged humanoids fly by overhead. And so this is already unusual in that she's describing more than one of these entities. And they all had these glowing red eyes, and she looks up at them, and they very unsettlingly look down at her. And of course, she's terrified. by this, and so she she runs inside as quickly as she can. Now, Roxanne's case is also a little unusual, and from what I remember from our conversations, she had told her sons about this, and they were surprisingly open-minded. One of them even suggesting that perhaps it would be like that it could have been related then to the World Trade Center disaster that had happened shortly thereafter.
Yes.
Now, I don't know that to be true, of course, but I mean, in terms of it being related, I believe that her son said that.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's unusual in several aspects.
Mm. Do you get many multiple creature sightings in this particular location? Because that's what struck me straight away. Is I can't remember anybody seeing more than one.
No, never actually. That is the only one off the top of my head. Now, I can't speak definitively because there have been dozens and dozens of these sightings. Yes. And there's always a possibility that I've forgotten something. Yeah. But that's the only one off the top of my head that I can remember that that would represent multiple beings being seen at one time.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of those things, you know, if we can't remember it, then that's fair enough. If there is some, fine. We were wrong, and now we know there are.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, people have asked, of course, many times if I thought this was a singular entity or if it represented a species or whatever, multiple entities, you know. And you know, I never really had the sense that it was just one thing, right? Even if it appears solitary, well, I mean, so do lots of things. You know, it's rare to see like mountain lions, or speaking of bears together. You know, like these are normally solitary hunters outside of mating season. And so just because you only tend to see one at a time, I don't think means that it has to just be this single entity that is responsible for all of these sightings. And so to receive a report featuring multiple of these creatures was very, very interesting, especially in that it seemed to corroborate that line of thinking.
Yes. I suppose it's one of those that after everything that's happened since the book came out, Tobias, and obviously in the last few weeks, since the rest of the world discovered who you were, I would imagine that the temptation to do a new book or revamp the original is foremost in your mind, or is it something that you're just thinking, let me just deal with everything else that's going on at the minute?
Well, you know, it's funny you mentioned that because I'm actually working on a new book right now with my friend Richard Estep.
Oh, right, yes.
And so we've been contracted by Llewellyn to write this Mothman book. Like they wanted a Mothman book. So, you know, yeah, we went ahead and said, well, sure, we'd be happy to do that. Really, it was all Richard, honestly, because they had approached him and said that they were interested in a book on Mothman. And he was like, well, you know, it's in his British accent, which I'm not even going to try. But, you know, he basically said like, well, you know, this is a little outside of my wheelhouse, but I know a guy. And so he reached out to me and he said, well, hey, do you want to write this book with me? And of course, I take every opportunity to work with my friends that I can. And so we've been working on that, and it is a sort of modern journey, you know, in search of this Mothman creature. But of course, we need to cover a lot of what happened in Point Pleasant and sort of connect that to the ongoing phenomenon. And so it should be fairly comprehensive, you know, in terms of trying to cover the entirety of what has been happening.
So you are going to try and write a book as big as Chris O'Brien's Stalking the Herd then?
I don't think they'll let us. They have a pretty strict like word limit. So if I show up with like 100,000 words or something, they're just going to say no.
Well, I'm sure you're in safe hands with Richard.
Oh yeah.
And I know he's one of those. He's like Nick Redfern. I don't know where he gets the time to write, especially as Richard is an EMT as well. You know what I mean? He's got a full-time career that takes him into some pretty hairy situations, and yet he's still out investigating and writing and all sorts. And obviously I knew something was in the pipeline because obviously I'm friends with you both, so I'd seen pictures of you both together enjoying each other's company, and I thought, what's happening here? But now I know.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, well, I wish you the very best of luck. I know Richard's overdue a return because he's not been on for a while, and I know hopefully we've got opportunity to speak. And keep me informed. I'd love to have you both on and talk about that. Hopefully, I would imagine that's going to be at some point next year.
Yeah, we're looking at September 2025, I believe.
Brilliant. Well, so. as if you need anything else to keep you tied up, Tobias.
I know. If you love what you do, you never work a day in your life, right?
It's a good job you do, sir. Good job you do. Well, Tobias, as always, it's been a real pleasure. For someone I always think I speak to more often than I do, it's always refreshing and lovely to spend time in your company. Where can everybody follow you and Emily's work, find your websites, and get hold of your original book on this fascinating case?
Sure. Well, thank you so much, Paul. I mean, I feel the exact same way. And I think it is because we talk to each other on social media fairly frequently that we think that we hang out more than we actually do. but we should work on changing that. Yes. In terms of where people can find me, if you're interested in the Singular Fortean Society, you can go to our website, singularfortean.com. You can follow the Singular Fortean Society at Singular Fortean on like X and Instagram and TikTok, or Singular Fortean Official on Facebook. If you want to see what I'm up to, you can follow me at Singular Tobias on X and Instagram, or Tobias Wayland Author, I believe, on Facebook. And of course, you can buy any of my books, The Lake Michigan Mothman, High Strangeness in the Midwest, Strange Tales of the Impossible, or the Singular Fortean Society's Yuletide Guide to High Strangeness, either through our website or, your favorite online book retailer like Amazon.
Fabulous. Well, I'll put links to everything into the show notes. And I just want to say thank you again for your time. I must admit, I was very surprised you were able to squeeze me in, because I can only imagine what your inbox looks like at the minute, my friend, especially now you've got a project.
Always have time for you.
Too kind. Well, listen, I wish you the very best of luck with it. Who knows which territory might see it next, so please keep me informed of any strange sightings you suddenly start to get from Tanzania or somewhere like that. Tobias, you never know. And I just want to wish you, Emily, and all your wonderful menagerie of pets the very best, and I hope we speak soon.
Absolutely. Best to you and yours as well, Paul. Thank you.